So I am up here without my sidekick Jake because he is our morning presenter. Jake Joraanstad is the CEO of Myriad Mobile and my boss, so I better say a few nice things about him. He is working hard with his team here in Fargo and doing mobile software development, working on a platform-based type of approach, and he is going to be talking about that this morning. So let's all welcome Jake.
Thank you, Camille. Morning, guys. How awesome was that party last night? I told you had to be there. Everybody made it out. Who made it to the party, like had a good time, enjoyed that? What about that band, right? D. Mills and the Thrills, how epic was that? Good stuff. That's why you're all tired. That's why I had a couple whiskeys last night, then finished my presentation, had a lot more creative juices going, worked out pretty well. So hopefully it's in the proper order, and I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit about what we've been up to and what I think the future of mobile looks like today. So. As you know, my name's Jake Joraanstad. The most important part about this slide is actually that you can find me on Twitter at Jake from Fargo. Pretty simple to find. There's a few other people from Fargo on Twitter, but if you can't find me, you got to figure something else out with Twitter. I took that this morning, and they put it up on the slide, so we're good. That's good. I'm going to have to move on from this slide now. So let me tell you a little bit about Myriad Mobile and what we've been up to. So we're a mobile software company here in Fargo. We've been around since 2011. We've got a team of about 40 mobile experts, we like to call ourselves, here in Fargo. And we've got a team of engineers, designers, mobile strategists, or you could call them business analysts, as well as a sales team that's here in Fargo. Linda is out there in Minneapolis. If you're on the Myriad team, raise your hand here in the crowd real quick. So there's quite a few of you guys joining us this morning. Appreciate you joining. I know some of these guys have billable work to do, but they're coming anyway, so they wanted to enjoy some of the summit. So we've been kicking some butt when it comes to mobile over the last 4 years. We've done something upwards of 300 mobile projects over the last 4 years. And one of our taglines is this concept of masterfully mobile. So our goal is, as a company, is how do we become masters at our craft of mobile technology? And the word myriad, it's actually in Greek means 10,000, the number 10,000. And some of you might know the idea that 10,000 hours spent at your craft makes you a master. So none of us have maybe spent 10,000 hours yet at our craft, but our goal as a company is to grow and grow and grow as our team gets better and becomes masters at the different parts of the mobile ecosystem that we work within. So, yep, we have a flag. If you've seen it here downtown Fargo, that's the only flag that's way up there. It's huge, 10-foot white flag. If you want to take a tour of our space sometime today or tomorrow, if you're still around, feel free to grab somebody from Myriad, but we'd love to show off. We just moved downtown a year ago, right on the north side of downtown Fargo. We call it the Myriad Castle. So we work with some awesome customers over the last few years, kind of in a lot of different spaces, but today one of our focuses is on 3 industries. It's manufacturing, agriculture, and financial services. So those are the 3 types of companies that we're working with and trying to grow our impact when it comes to mobile with. So I'm going to talk today about platform first, this concept of what I think the future of mobile needs to look like. But before that, that didn't work. Let's see if we got a better one. So I shared an update last year that there was probably about 75% of us are using our mobile devices while we're on the toilet. So that fact is no longer true. It's more like 90%. So I used to ask the crowd, hey, raise your hand if you use your phone while you're on the toilet. And you can just all raise your hand now at this point because it's 90% of us. So please just do it so you finally admit it to yourself and your friends. Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. And the ones that aren't raising are lying, and that's okay. So that's the case. So let's talk about mobile in the enterprise. And when we're talking about enterprises, we're talking about businesses that might be business to consumer, where somebody like an Uber, or a business to business company where they maybe sell manufacturing materials to other companies. So we're going to be talking about sort of the whole gamut of what a business looks at when it comes to mobile today. So I'm going to start with the first generation of mobile technology and the first mobile apps that you saw on the market a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And we call those checking the box mobile apps. You guys know what I'm talking about here? Hey, we need an app. Somebody in the company says, we need a mobile app. And everybody else is like, oh, what is he thinking about? We don't need an app right now. We've got a great website. We've got this. Well, somebody just gets this inkling that says, we got to check the box like everybody else is doing. And that was sort of that first generation of what mobile apps look like. I'll show you some failed attempts. So one of those is IKEA. Okay, so this app, IKEA had the brilliant idea. Somebody in the executive team said, we need to build a mobile app. And instead of building an experience that was awesome for company or for people when they come into the store, IKEA decided to just take their catalog in catalog format with pages and just stick it in a mobile app. And on top of that, they built, these are actually two different platforms. This is iOS and this is Android, and it looks identical. And if you know any Android users, they hate it when their apps look like iPhones. So this is sort of what one of that check the box app, right? We want to have an app on the store. It doesn't really do anything functional. You can't really shop in a catalog that literally shows the full, PDF of a catalog and app. It's not very useful for somebody. The other one, has anybody ever done this? They went to download, or they were encouraged to download an app for their favorite gas station or something like this, and you download the app, and the only thing it really does is tell you where all the gas stations are at. Has anybody seen this happen before? Like, why do I have to go out to a store, download an app, and just to find out that, hey, there's a gas station around the corner from me? I mean, we can do that on Google, and so that was another sort of check the box, no strategy, no real idea other than, hey, we need to have our brand in the App Store, and so we're gonna check the box. So a first step to failure in your kind of check the box apps is you pay that developer that lives in their basement, their parents' basement, with pizzas, right? So pizzas don't equal the BuzzFeed, best of 2014 mobile app. You can't pay somebody enough, give somebody enough pizzas to build an awesome app like that. Basically, the strategy of working with somebody like that who doesn't have that long-term thinking in mind, they're just looking to make a buck or two or make a pizza, it's not going to help you with your business. The next step to failure is to actually pay that same developer in the basement real money, and now you're out everything that you're kind of trying to do as you're building this sort of check-the-box kind of application. And so typically what we saw was in that sort of era of check-the-box, companies were spending between $25,000 and maybe $50,000 to build a check-the-box app. And you have to ask yourself, was it worth it to do that? When you've got sort of, the first IKEA app that came out was, this catalog. They probably spent $50,000, and about a year later, they threw the whole thing out and redid the whole IKEA experience because it just wasn't where it needed to be. So was it worth it to spend $25,000 or $50,000 to get that done? So the second generation, so what happened a few years later, what people were starting to do is, hey, we can build useful utility apps. So, the first thing you started to see was every grocery store came out with their own app. They were checking the box, but at least it did something useful. You could make a grocery list to remind yourself, and that was sort of the initial utility tools that people were building. And then there was, from an enterprise standpoint, companies were building sales apps. The one-off. Here's our sort of everything that we sell in a company, and we're going to use this app out in the business world to share what we've been up to. Problem is, there's no strategy there either, because a year later, the products have changed, and your app had no sort of concept of how do you cater to a changing sales environment, and you didn't think through this tool, and so it might become useless in a year. You have to redo it and remake that investment. And then, but again, this is kind of getting to the point where people were starting to make useful tools, and it's kind of got exciting. But then Apple had to enforce a rule because there were so many great utility apps. They had to make a rule that literally in their application store rules, there's no more fart apps allowed on the store. Like, they call that out specifically, that there's so many utility apps around farts that we had to cancel anybody else who wanted to do that. It's not allowed anymore. So that was sort of what happened when everybody started building these sort of little tools on mobile. But again, a fart app doesn't have a whole lot of strategy, right? And so it's lacking that roadmap. You have to ask the question, a year from now, what does my mobile app look like a year out? What does it look like? And a one-off app, they don't survive. Even the fart apps don't survive, right? But what happens is you need to make a real investment over time to make that sort of application continue to live on and be useful in the long term. And so that's what I want to get to. And typically what you're seeing, you probably can build a fart app for less than $50,000, but typically companies are spending between $50,000 and $100,000 to build a utility app that did the job for what that specific purpose was, but it didn't have a long-term roadmap as to how that app would evolve and become useful for the company a year later. So they lack longevity, and then the other piece is there's no ecosystem. How does somebody integrate with a fart app? Or how does somebody, that doesn't make any sense really, but how does somebody take that sales tool and actually grow it within the organization? What if somebody else in the manufacturing side that's not doing sales wants to use some of the tools that are in that sales app? How do you make that work if you're just building this one-off utility? And so those are the questions you start to ask. Now, the real problem today that enterprises face is it looks a lot like this. So if you're in an organization here today that has some sort of system world that looks like this, raise your hand. If you've got Dynamics running or Salesforce and a mixture of some crazy stuff on your website, you might have 3 different technologies running your website, or yours might look like this. You've got an accounting system and you're running NetSuite, and maybe you made a good choice and you're actually running WordPress for your site. But it's a total mess. How do you tie all this together as a company? So that's where the next generation of platforms comes in. Nope, this is the wrong picture here. There we go. Platform first. The next generation of mobile technology, I think, is this concept of platform. And I'm going to share a little bit about what that is. But this guy, Steve, said a product is useless without a platform. Or more precisely and accurately, a platformless product will always be replaced by an equivalent platformized product. So those one-off tools eventually will get replaced by something that's not one-off. That's something that has a strategy and a roadmap that can evolve and change to the different needs as mobile changes, and we all know how quick that's happening. So this is the concept. So let's look at Uber as a case study. So Uber just launched in Fargo like 2 weeks ago. Can we get a round of applause for getting Uber here in Fargo? I know Minneapolis, you guys are spoiled and you've had Uber for years or whatever, but we worked hard to get Uber to consider Fargo. Now we've got probably 3 to 5 drivers on average around town in Fargo, so it's been fun. So Uber is a perfect example of what a long-term roadmap of a mobile technology or a mobile app needs to look like when it comes to platforms. So far, and I think you guys probably know some of this, Uber's raised almost $6 billion in 10 rounds to build this company, right? I mean, that's ridiculous. Who's going to build a platform for $6 billion? Right now, they're raising something like on a $50 billion valuation is what they're going for right now. They're trying to buy Nokia. Here, Maps. They're in a bidding war with a German company. It's just crazy, right? So not all that money, obviously, is going towards building their mobile technology or their platform. But there's some studies and some people have talked about and worked with Uber to figure out, based on the early rounds of what Uber did and how much money they raised, they think that they built the minimum viable product for Uber for about $1 million to $1.5 million. So that's pretty significant, right? Not every company is spending $1 million to build a platform for their corporation. But the architecture is what matters. How did Uber sort of structure this $1 million investment in this technology to make it work for the long haul? So when you look at sort of the platform architecture of Uber, and you start to think about what did they build for $1 million that all it does is pull up a map and show where people are at driving around, and then there's another app that the taxi drivers use. I mean, that can't be $1 million. Well, when they can literally with a flick of a button turn on the ice cream machine guys into their system, and you can actually get ice cream delivered to your front door with the Uber app in San Francisco, they did something right with the platform. They made it flexible, right? They were delivering kittens the other day, I think in San Francisco as well. So they built this sort of platform that has the ability to be flexible and adapt as the needs change. And obviously ice cream is maybe not a need, but Uber's talking about taking over, what UPS does today, being able to do that with an individual driver around town doing deliveries or going to pick up your favorite food that doesn't do delivery in town. So the platform for Uber, that architecture that they built it on mattered a lot. So that $1 million investment didn't go to waste because it started to help them sort of grow and evolve this platform. So what is a platform? What am I talking about when we're talking about platforms? So the first 2 apps we talked about, the utility app and the check the box app, is everything that fits into this box right here. A platform for mobile technology and even web-based technology looks like this and everything else going to the right. So when you start, this looks pretty messy, but let's start in the center here. So web services, those are things like Microsoft Azure, Linode, Amazon Web Services, and some of Google's cloud. So that's sort of that web service layer that you're running your technology on. When you do a platform approach to things like Uber did, I'm not sure if they're on Amazon's infrastructure or whose they're on, but what they did was they built those features around what the app was doing, not in this box. They didn't build the features in the app itself that went out on the store. They were building those features on their web service platform so that as Uber's app needed to evolve, it could utilize the same feature sets. And Uber has two different apps today. They have the customer-facing app and they have that taxi app. Well, how Uber does it is they've got a standard communication back to their web services to pull information from the same place. And what an API is, an application programming interface. It's a concept of standardizing the communication that you use to communicate into your platform that you might have built for your company. So a good idea of how that works is when a company wants to build an iOS app for their sales team, like we saw earlier, that iPad app, and then I want to actually have our website pull the same information about our sales materials that we're using, and then yet another application. If you're using the same communication, it makes that much easier than having to recreate the wheel every single time. And so that's why that API is important. That's why the web services themselves are important. You know, the database itself, when you're talking about big data going forward and you don't know maybe what information your platforms are going to start collecting, you might have all of a sudden you might want to add like an autonomous car to your platform. You've got an app that's running on an autonomous car that's reporting data up through that same API. If you don't have that database architecture figured out and sort of flexible in a way that you can use and analyze that data, you're missing out too. So that's another part of that investment that it takes and something like what Uber did. And the other part is this sort of integration that we're talking about on the far right here. So we saw that problem that enterprises have today where they've got all these different systems and typically they're not an ecosystem, they don't talk to each other. Well, when you take a platform approach to things, you can tie all of those systems together under sort of one roof. And so what we've learned to do and what we've seen other companies doing is we can have that one single cloud layer, that web service, and we can tie right back into a Salesforce and pull from their communication tool, their API, and actually pull all that information into one place so that when you've got 6 different mobile apps out there in the store over the next 5 years, it makes a lot of sense. So that's sort of this concept of what we're talking about when we're talking about a platform. And I think the most important piece now going forward for companies to be thinking about it is you couldn't have a platform for anything less than $1 million a few years ago. It was very difficult to sort of spin up some sort of framework like that, like Uber has, and you had to invest a lot of time and money. And then these services came along. Microsoft Azure actually lets you log in and literally click a couple buttons and you can spin up a WordPress instance, and then within that you can spin up an application interface so that you can build mobile apps on Microsoft Azure. So they built these tools for companies like us to use to help other businesses enable this sort of platform approach, but not for $1 million, but for something like $75,000 to $150,000 is what a business is probably going to spend today if you're working with another company to get a platform done. And if you do that, you're not ever going to be throwing that money out in a few years from now like you are with the first two apps. So instead of spending $50,000 or $100,000, spend $75,000 to $150,000, and you've got an ecosystem that you're building. And what matters there is it's future-proof, right? So you start thinking about what if the different groups within the organization need to use the same features for another app that you didn't think about the first time. With the platform, you can allow for that to happen. It allows for users to be managed. You can do the integration we talked about. We've got that common communication or API. Then you've got your security and your management all under sort of one roof. So if I want to manage my mobile application today, if I built a utility app, I have to literally redo the application and put it up to the App Store and get it approved to get that content updated. But if you've built a platform, you can have a content management system much like WordPress where you're controlling sort of what that application looks like and the content that's there, where that content's coming from, that kind of thing. So the ecosystem really matters around how you're approaching the platform. And the other piece, I think this is probably the most important for the next 3 to 5 years, as we don't know exactly what Apple Watch is going to do or what this augmented reality thing that's going on with Google Glass as they sort of redo what they're trying to approach, and you've got your device that's in your house controlling just about everything in your house. If you have a platform approach to things, it doesn't matter that 3 years from now the way you're communicating is through a different device, because the actual way that data and information is being gathered is still the same. There's a standard sort of protocol you can use that's probably a 5-year sort of approach to being future-proof and future-enabling. So our recommendation is, as a company and as people go out and look to build, whether it's you're building a product for your organization, you're a startup, you're trying to build a product like Uber, or you're building an enterprise-wide tool that's enabling mobile within your company, platform-first approach is probably the one answer that's worth it today. 3 years ago it might be a different answer, but today a platform-first approach is worth it. So I've got some time for Q&A. That's a little bit about what I think the future looks like, and I'd like to open up for questions and go from here. So make sure you hit me up on Twitter as well. We got Myriad up there too. We can clap. We can clap. Camille's going to run around with a mic. I don't know if we have another mic that you can help with, but we should be good. Any thoughts or feedback on sort of this approach?
How are you planning for back-end data that you're collecting on whatever device you're using or whatever mobile app you're using?
How are we planning what? What was the question?
Your app, all of your apps are collecting data. How are you planning for the future of what that data could be used for when you're looking at developing the app?
That's a good question. That's probably one of the harder things to think about is what types of data will you eventually have to collect as a company or whatever your application is doing. If you start out with sort of the basic understandings, whether it's a SQL database or a NoSQL database, whatever that looks like for your part, the idea of a platform is that you can actually add you can augment or add to or change the structure of the database or add to what you're collecting, and your other applications are still running and functioning, and then you can roll out that new application that might collect new data. So the way you sort of set up the architecture is really important, but once you have it set up, you can extend and build upon sort of that baseline. So we might not have the answer today as to what sort of the big data collection needs to look like 5 years from now, but if you have this approach, you can basically make the changes as needed without throwing everything out with it. Does that make sense? Somebody else had a question over there. Yeah.
I was wondering, what sort of questions do you encourage organizations to ask themselves when they start building a platform?
Yeah. Well, one of the first question is, what's your sort of MVP look like? What is the minimum viable platform or product or app that you want to get out there? What does that look like? And then try to ask, what is the second phase or the sort of the future a year from now? What does that application need to look like? And make sure that the decision you're making around which sort of web service and sort of infrastructure you're building, does that support that in the future? And with the cloud infrastructure today, it can scale across, Uber's probably running on Amazon or Microsoft, and they're able to scale to millions and millions of users. So asking the question around, you don't have to ask the question around which sort of web service is going to really scale for you, but the way you develop it needs to be, taking into account what you think maybe a year looks like as far as feature sets go. And then the other piece I think is the platform approach right for your company right now, or is a utility app the right answer? Typically, the answer is not that you just need a utility app today, because I think most organizations are looking at a mobile strategy that's much bigger than just one application. So I think the most important part is just to ask yourself, if we're going to build this one app today, what is it going to look like in a year from now? And then you have to try to make as much of the decisions that you can off of that understanding, because you can't know 3 years from now, but if you sort of approach the architecture right from the beginning, I think you can accommodate for whatever might change down the road. Any other thoughts, guys? All right, I think we're good. All right, thanks for coming out this morning, guys. I think Camille's got some more base for you.